let's start first of all looking at the core factors responsible for the incessant collapse of our national grid in this country.
Thank you, Simon. Let me begin by saying that the federal government of Nigeria, worried by the need to provide stable electric power, has gone through a lot. You can call it an evolution. And part of that evolution is what made one of the major actors company to be formed. And that company is Transmission Company of Nigeria, TCN. The purpose of having TCN in place is not far-fetched. Is to ensure that the power that is being generated by the GENCOs, generation companies, are efficiently and effectively evacuated and then delivered to the distribution company. The distribution companies are then charged with the responsibility of ensuring that the power gets to homes or to customers generally. So you have three stakeholders. You have the generation companies, the distribution companies, and the transmission company is at the center. The role, the responsibilities of the transmission company, I must say, is quite huge and very central to ensuring that stable power supply is delivered to customers. Traditionally, the Transmission Company of Nigeria is the only one out of the three that was not privatized. Because it was not privatized, it means that government would now pay attention to ensuring that funding, adequate funding for maintenance of the operations of the transmission company is provided. And the transmission company also has the technical role to ensure that funds that are provided by government is used to execute projects that will ensure generated power is evacuated and then distributed to the distribution companies efficiently and effectively. Is that been done? Is that been achieved? I would say the result is obvious. Nigerians can tell whether Transmission Company of Nigeria is effectively and efficiently playing its role. But for obvious reasons, we are at the moment in a trying period in this country where we have system collapse in 1 week, and in 2 days, we also have 2 system collapses. Well, whatever is responsible for that incident gives serious concern to everyone in this country, especially the federal government, headed by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who has obviously been desirous of ensuring that the issue of stable power supply is achieved by appointing Bayo Adelabu as the Minister of Power, to whom that responsibility is saddled with. Now, what is responsible for system collapse? A system collapse happens when the generation companies generally are generating zero. And the technical experts will say that there must be a strong reason for the generation companies not to be able to generate power at any point in time. There are so many reasons. but principally for the power plants that operate on gas, a lot of their problems is resolving around the gas supply.
Right.
When gas is not supplied to a power plant that generates power from gas, then obviously it will generate zero power. And for other sources of generating power, like the hydropower plants, for the hydropower plants, once the water level is not adequate to fire the turbines, automatically it will also, at a point, be generating zero power. For renewable energy, wind, solar, and plants, it's also a source of generating power. At a point also, if, for instance, the wind strength is not enough to turn the turbines, the wind plant will not be generating any power. And for the solar power plant also, if it is not having enough solar that can charge the battery to sustain stable power supply, it will also be generating.
And that is sunlight.
Zero power. That is sunlight. So for the plants, there has to be, or plants to waste, there has to be enough waste. If a plant is generating power from waste, then there must be adequate waste to turn the turbines. If also that is not available, it will be generating zero power. So what is happening in Nigeria today is that the frequency of system collapse is becoming a daily affair. And that gives a serious concern to the federal government, especially the Minister of Power, whose responsibility it is to ensure that system collapse does not happen. Let me say that, do we have the right team that will work tirelessly round the clock to ensure that system collapse does not happen? Your guess is as good as mine.
Okay, maybe we should go beyond guessing. Do we actually have that vital resource?
Well, now that the Honorable Minister of Power has set up an investigative panel to really dig deep into the technical competence or whatever reasons there are that is responsible for the state of affairs in the sector, it will be, that move will not be preempted, and I would not be in a position to say, unless the committee completes its assignment, it will be too early to tell. But let me say, from the setting up of the committee, I would say that, do you really want to get a good result out of carrying out an investigation that will really bring out the inefficiencies in the system? I would say the best way is for you to appoint an independent investigative panel that does not include the current team that are on the ground that is responsible for the state of affairs in the sector. It is very, very necessary. It is obvious if you are probing someone and you are investigating someone, and that person is also allowed or given a role, a major role to play, then what are you investigating? Your investigation will not give you the desired results.
Conflict of interest?
Conflict of interest, yes. So I see that the outcome of the results would be quite strange if it does not sustain or retain the status quo. By sustaining the status quo, it means that the essence of carrying out that onerous task of investigative panel will be defeated. So I think from the word go, if I would advise, I would still say that it's important for the investigative panel to be independent. You will get the best result out of it without any intervention, without any internal interference, without any stage managed acts by the team on the ground that is responsible for the current state of affairs. Is quite important, because if we really need to get a result, then we need somebody that is independent,
right,
to give an independent opinion of what is really happening. Now, as a practitioner, as a consultant in the sector, I would say that a lot is desired to avoid the frequency of system collapse that we are having, that will yank off a whole region for reasons that is obvious are avoidable at this time, that we have all sorts of ways and means to detect faults that are lingering and impeding the smooth evacuation of power that you can obtain within a fingertip, even through the use of artificial intelligence. If that is not going on, I think something is fundamentally needing attention. And that attention behoves on the Honorable Minister of Power to ensure that for him to achieve his mandate as the minister, Honorable Minister of Power, and then leave his name in gold, then he needs to know that a lot of these things that are happening that are responsible for system collapse or grid disturbance, they are avoidable.
Let's talk about some of these issues. I mean, look at countries like South Africa. Then you look at Egypt, for instance, Morocco, Algeria, and quite a number of these countries within the continent. See what they've done with their power mix, or what you call energy mix, for example. Yes, we've talked about an investigative panel already being set up by the Honorable Minister of Power, talking about Adelabu. But let's talk about what Nigeria can learn from these other countries. South Africa, for example, in 2010, of course, as part of efforts to be able to host very effectively the World Cup, had to scale up its power capacity, distribution, generation, and what have you. Nigeria is supposedly the giant of the continent, whether economically or otherwise. As we sit here tonight, with or without this investigative panel, what are some of the practical issues that must be dealt with as quickly as possible?
Whenever something like this is happening, and then the examples that you are giving of South Africa and other African countries like Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, is that they have a unique style of managing the power sector. As they give you appointment as a manager, they give you a task. Are you able to achieve that task? If for any reason you are not able to achieve that task, you are asked to turn in your resignation honorably, and then give other people the opportunity
to try.
Is that happening here in Nigeria? You can tell. If it is not happening in Nigeria, then Nigeria, if there is inadequate power supply in Nigeria, it is as a result of not having a standard template that appointees of the sector would be given to achieve. Usually, traditionally, it is expected that if you are appointed a managing director, you are given an assignment, and in black and white, that the major issues we've been having in this country is that of system collapse. They will give you a minimum number of system collapse that you must not allow to happen. And if it does happen, you are going. Is that happening? I'm not sure that is happening. If that is not happening, then the sequence, the frequency of system collapse will continue to happen. Unless that is enforced and applied, then nothing will change. There is no emotional, there shouldn't be any emotional attachment to running an office. When you are running an office, that office is expected to achieve results. And once that desired result is not being achieved, I think remove sentiments aside and then get the right people to run the business. It is a business that must be run on the basis of results. If those results are not being achieved, then I feel that the right decision or the right strategies are not being utilized to achieve the desired result. So it's up to the government to know that the frequency of what is happening now in the sector requires serious action. And the Honorable Minister of Power has the capacity to be selfless, to be seen to be an unbiased umpire of the sector. Wherever a manager is not performing or a team is not performing, I think you remove sentiments aside and then give people, there are 1,001 people who have the capacity to transform and give the desired result. A lot has happened, and then people who had the opportunity to serve. Just before I got in here, I was reading some of the profiles on the transmission sector, and I was told that one of the MDs who served in the company, at his time, was able to introduce projects that ensured there's adequate, stable power supply, all right, in the company. And in those areas where he implemented and introduced those projects, till tomorrow, he's still a hero. He's still a champion. Now, those sort of legacies that management need to arm themselves with is very, very important. If you are appointed as a managing director, during your period as a managing director, what have you been able to achieve? If you have not been able to achieve something, then the shame is on you. But for the government must make sure that there is a template to show that when you are appointed, just like appointment of ministers, they are told to sign, as you are appointed a minister, you will sign your exit slip, that the president has the right, if you are not performing for any reason, to ask you to go.
Right.
So the MDAs, not only in the power sector, the MDAs must also be given that kind of directive, that kind of, you know, like appointment plan, that they will have a template. Right. Then it will enable them ginger and achieve results. But where there is none, you have this kind of serious lapses. And I am sure the embarrassment that this country is going through as a result of the current status of power supply in Nigeria, the Honorable Minister of Power, Chief Bayo Adelabu, must be very, very stern and firm. And he must also not sleep. It's not a situation that calls for a minister to sleep. No, it's a time that you work around the clock. Right. And incidentally, by history, in the power sector, the distribution companies, they work around the clock. The transmission companies, they work around the clock. The generation companies, they work around the clock. There is no sleep. they operate shifts. So the issue of saying that certain faults cannot be detected to avoid system collapse, I think is ridiculous.
I'm afraid of this panel, and I think that's also the sentiment of Nigerians, that this is not the first time we're seeing panels being set up in things like this, even beyond the power sector. Like we mentioned earlier, we're not here to preempt the panel.
Absolutely.
But we must get results as a country ultimately.
Absolutely.
Some people have said funding is one of the challenges. You also alluded to the possibility of manpower probably being a challenge in this regard. While we are hoping that, yes, as quickly as possible, these issues will be resolved, this embarrassment will come to an end ultimately, isn't also time we looked beyond the traditional mode of generating power or transmitting power in this country to other, if you like, alternatives, like we have whether in Europe, in Asia, or even in the Middle East?
Simon, you already mentioned about the energy mix in South Africa, in Egypt, in Morocco, in other African countries like Rwanda, and those other countries where power supply, reliability of power supply is predictable.
Right.
There is nothing that stops any government, any serious government, to imbibe those energy mixes that will give you, number one, adequate generation. Now, the reason why we are having this issue of system collapse, grid collapse, is because there is no generation. Now, if you have other sources of generating power, and then you have adequate power in stock, in reserve, what will make the system collapse? There could be technical issues. Technical issues, like I said, can be addressed by employing, effective artificial intelligence. There are also techniques that can identify, even if it is an insect that is on your line, it can be detected. Once that insect is infringing on a line, in your supply chain, it will be detected through a camera. Why are we not using those technologies to improve power supply services? If we are able to do all of those, I think to a large extent, we have all the technologies currently within us to improve and ensure that the energy mix that we apply, for instance, if you are going to generate power from wind, the wind is free.
Right.
You don't pay for it. If you are going to generate, the source of generating power from wind is free. If you are also generating from sun, from solar, the source of generating the power from sun is free. So if you are also generating from waste, this waste that you see scattered all around the country in different locations in major parts of the city is a strong source of generating power. If you are generating that power from waste, it means that you have to have a given number of vehicles at any point in time that will evacuate the waste effectively to your generation plant. So the waste is free. Waste is free. So if you look at, in terms of cost effectiveness of the different sources of power supply, I think now everybody is saying it's an era of renewable energy. There's no mistake about it, and we should also face it very squarely, and then ensure that we'll take advantage of its cost effectiveness and cost efficiency of the sources of generating that power supply through renewable sources. And added to that also, there is a global trend that is also supporting green power.
Right.
Now,
Energy transition.
Energy transition.
Right.
Energy transition is big funding opportunity, is big funding support for power projects to achieve power to achieve stable power supply. A lot is coming up now. You can see that the world's attention is in that regard.
Right.
So, in Nigeria's case, it will not be any different. If you pay special attention to Morocco, to Egypt, to a large extent, or to some extent, South Africa, a lot is coming up there to show you that renewable energy is the way to go. And then renewable energy is more cost effective than any other source of generating power. And that's the best way to go. You can hybridize also. If you are having, you can have a mix in order to avoid system collapse or to avoid lack of power.
So you have alternatives.
You have an alternative within the same grid. You can introduce like solar and wind together.
Right.
The solar or the wind, the solar will support the wind when there is no wind to blow, all right, and then vice versa. So if you are able to employ those techniques and technologies, there will be no system collapse.
All right.
And like I said,
Yes.
majorly is actually having the right team. If you have the right team with technical competence, a lot of what is going on at the moment will be minimized, will be reduced.